This is Lesson 6, Matthew chapter 13. The introductory remarks say Matthew 13 records 7 parables Jesus taught about the kingdom of heaven. These parables not only inform us about the nature of the king and his kingdom, but they also transform us by highlighting the qualities of kingdom citizens that Jesus desires. For those seeking God, the parables provide compact and memorable lessons. For those who were unreceptive, the parables were easy to dismiss and ignore. The material doesn't ask us about the location where all these parables took place, but we're told in chapter 13, verses 1 through 3, and this is the setting for the whole chapter except the last few verses. On the same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the sea. That's referring to the Sea of Galilee. Get the maps up here. And of course, this is the Sea of Galilee here. This is Galilee, the region, blow-up version here. Probably up near Capernaum, which was his home base, as we've discussed before. So on the same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the sea. Great multitudes were gathered together to him, so that he got into a boat and sat, and the whole multitude stood on the shore. Then he spoke many things to them in parables. Question 1 asks, how are the disciples different from the great crowds of people gathered by the sea to listen to Jesus? This is a reference to verses 10 through 17. After Jesus told the parable of the sower, we're told in verse 10 that the disciples came to him and asked, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" Jesus replied, "Because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables." And then he quotes Isaiah, "Though seeing they do not see, though hearing they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it." Again, question 1 asks, how are the disciples different from the great crowds of people gathered by the sea to listen to Jesus? Jesus explained that he spoke to the crowds in parables because the knowledge, he said, of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. This sounds prejudicial if we don't understand the rest of the text. In verses 13 through 15, Jesus explains that the crowds did not understand what he was saying because they had the wrong attitude. The beginning of verse 15 says, "This people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes." Then Jesus contrasted that attitude with the attitude of the apostles, or the disciples, in the next verse. Verse 16, he says, "But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear." All the truth in the world will benefit no one who does not love truth. It will benefit no one who has the wrong attitude toward it. Question 2 says, in the parable of the sower, what obstacles to fruitfulness does Jesus warn us about? That's verses 18 through 23 is where he explains the parable of the sower, the meaning of it. And we find the answers to this question. Beginning in verse 18, "Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth or riches choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 100, 60, and 30 times what was sown. So again, question number 2 asks, in the parable of the sower, what obstacles to fruitfulness does Jesus warn us about? In verse 19, the wayside soil, Jesus warns of the danger of not understanding the word. In verses 20 and 21, the rocky or stony soil, Jesus warns of the danger of lack of commitment. This person gladly receives the word and is probably emotionally moved by it, but because they lack commitment, they turn away when problems and difficulties come as a result of trying to follow Christ's teaching. In verse 22, the thorny soil, Jesus warns of the danger of the cares of the world, worries of the world, and riches or wealth. When our lives become suffocated by temporary concerns, we become unfruitful. And we need to understand that Satan couldn't care less whether we fall away because of shallow understanding or lack of commitment or the cares and riches of the world. Any of these things will keep us from bearing fruit. And if we fail to bear fruit, we will fall away. Question number 3 asks, how does Jesus' explanation of the parable of the sower in verses 18 through 23 and the parable of the tares in verses 36 through 43 guide and train us to interpret his other parables? Well, they teach us to look for the main truth that the parable teaches. What is the parable's central lesson? When that is established, then all of the parable's related truths should be evaluated in view of the whole framework. They teach us not to try to assign a meaning to every single detail in the parable. Many details are not necessarily significant. They were given simply to add color to the story. These parables help us to understand these basic principles. Question number 4 says, according to the parable of the tares, who is responsible for the evil in the world? And it refers to verses 28 and 39. When Christ told this parable to the multitudes in verse 28, he said, an enemy has done this. Later, when Jesus explains this to the disciples in verse 39, he explains the enemy who sold them is the devil. So that's the answer to the question. Question number 5. How does the expansion of Jesus' kingdom as described in the parables of the mustard seed and leaven differ from the expansion of earthly kingdoms such as Rome? This refers to verses 31 through 33, these 2 short parables. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. He told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all through the dough. Again, the question asks, how does the expansion of Jesus' kingdom as described in the parables of the mustard seed and leaven differ from the expansion of earthly kingdoms such as Rome? Earthly kingdoms are enlarged by military might. Those kingdoms were enlarged with blaring trumpets, invading armies, charging horses, clanging swords, and victory marches. These parables indicate that the growth of Christ's kingdom occurs from teaching others. Its growth occurs silently through human hearts and through changed lives. Question number 6. What qualities of kingdom citizens are recommended in the parables of the hidden treasure and the pearl of great price? 2 more short parables that focus on a same theme. This refers to verses 44 through 46. It says, "The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it." So question number 6 says, what qualities of kingdom citizens are commended in the parables of the hidden treasure and the pearl of great price? Well, I would say rejoicing over truth, rejoicing over what was found, and that's clearly referring to the truth, the word, the gospel. Rejoicing over spiritual things being more important than physical things, a willingness to risk all and to give up everything for the cause of Christ, for the kingdom. Question number 7 says, many people desire rulers to administer swift and decisive judgment at the first sign of trouble. What does the parable of the dragnet teach us about Jesus' approach? Verses 47 through 52. We're told, once again, Jesus said, once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. This is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all these things? Jesus asked. Yes, they replied. He said to them, therefore every teacher of the law who has become a disciple in the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a house who brings out of his storeroom new treasures as well as old. Didn't need to read verses 51 through 53 there. But again, question 7 was, many people desire rulers to administer swift and decisive judgment at the first sign of trouble. What does the parable of the dragnet teach us about Jesus' approach? This parable teaches that as a rule, people are allowed to continue their lives doing good or evil, and that there will be a specific day of reckoning at the end of time for all people. Question number 8 asks, why did Jesus limit the miracles he performed in Nazareth? Well, this is the only key place that he mentions in the material, and it's obviously, again, referring to Nazareth. Nazareth was a little less than 20 miles from the Sea of Galilee. And let me get my cursor up here. And that would probably be the nearest location there in Galilee. So this was probably another 5 miles or more to Capernaum. Nazareth down here in the southern portion of the region of Galilee. And it's not identified as Nazareth, but it calls it his hometown in verse 54, and we understand that was Nazareth. We know that was Nazareth. Beginning in verse 53, when Jesus had finished these parables, he moved on from there. Coming to his hometown, that would be Nazareth, he began teaching the people in their synagogue, and they were amazed. Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers, they asked. Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary, and aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? Aren't all his sisters with us? When then did this man get all these things? And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own town and in his own home. And he did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith or their unbelief. Again, question 8 asks, why did Jesus limit the miracles he performed in Nazareth? Well, verse 58 that we just read provides the answer for that. He did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith or their unbelief. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus said, do not cast your pearls before swine. Jesus was observing that principle here in his hometown. The people in Nazareth were prejudiced against Jesus, so they were not receptive to him. Jesus knew that. So he was not going to waste time trying to persuade people who had already made up their minds against him. Then we got the 3 standard application questions. And I'll just note that all of my applications have a similar theme. Application number 9 says, I admire and will imitate Jesus' example of merely teaching the Word and allowing the Word to do its work on people's hearts. That is, not trying to persuade them with my own reasoning or my pressure. Application 10. To better follow Jesus, I will try to be wise in recognizing that there's a time to walk away when people make it clear that they have no interest in truth. Application 11. Something I will tell others about Jesus is that he will not use pressure tactics to try to get people to follow him. His kingdom is enlarged when people see the value of his word, when they determine to follow him regardless of the cost. He tells us to pray to bear much fruit in spite of the evil in the world. He tells us to pray for the kingdom of heaven to grow and expand. And he tells us to pray for boldness to value God's kingdom above all else.